All right. Hello there, everyone. This is Miss Robinson. This lecture is going to be on the ancient Romans. As we move through our unit on ancient civilizations, the Romans is one of my personal favorites. And I think they are one of the most famous. Historically, people tend to refer back to the Romans, and that is for a reason, which we are going to get into. So, before we start, some of our essential questions that we're going to hope to answer throughout this lecture and on the lessons that we do around it. The first one is going to be, how did the development of Roman civilization impact other civilizations? So, how did it not only come from the civilizations that came before the ancient Romans, but how did it impact other later civilizations that developed? What were the major characteristics that defined Roman rule? So, what were the things that made it unique? What were the things that made it successful? And how did the technological advancements aid and contribute to Roman rule? So, what technology, not even just mechanical technology, so what other skills, what tools, what developments aided the Romans in their success? And lastly, where do you see evidence of Roman rule contributing to the modern world? So, this kind of goes along with the first question, in that how did the Romans impact what came after? So let's do a little bit of context. So, place and time. Roman civilization developed between about 509 BC and 476 AD. The height of Roman rule was kind of in the earlier period. So, the height of Roman rule occurred between probably 509 BC and 276 BC. And then into as we got into AD, you're thinking about more of the Roman Empire and what came after it. So the type of government was a republic. So the republic is going to become an important term as we talk about the difference between the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, which we're going to get to. But just to kind of establish this vocabulary term, a republic is a form of government in which the leader is not a king. Okay, so their main kind of head honcho of the government is not a king. There are different positions throughout history in different republics, but the leader is not a king, and certain citizens do have the right to vote, so they get to actually participate in government. So, continuing with our place and time, we did the who, we did the what, we're going to do the where. So, where was the Roman civilization? This is kind of a loaded question because Rome expanded as it got more powerful. So, if you can see the Roman Republic in the red there, if we're looking at the map, in the red, you can see it pretty much occupying most of the boot of Italy. At the time, this is the Roman Republic. So this is with representative government. The Romans could participate in government. And as the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire, it obviously got much, much, much bigger. As you can see, at its most powerful, when the Roman Empire was at its most powerful, it expanded around the entire Mediterranean Sea. So you can see it goes all the way out onto the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern day Spain and France and Portugal. So it went all the way down there and onto the continent of Africa, all the way down, expanding through Alexandria, Egypt, down to the Red Sea, and then all the way back up around again, and had conquered Greece, Anatolia, and all of those different territories. So, starting with this Roman Republic that I've been kind of throwing that term around. Just to review again, a Roman Republic, right? A republic is a type of government in which the people can participate in government. They elect officials to essentially make decisions. Okay, so this Roman Republic is on that little boot in Italy, and it became very powerful. And this had partially to do with the fact that it was in a super good location, right? So you can see in this republic, it was surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, so there was plenty of waterways for trade. They had plenty of access to other trade routes and other countries so they could trade with them. But it was also pretty protected, right? So they're not right up against the Atlantic Ocean, right? They're kind of tucked back in there, which was pretty ideal, right? They could have all sorts of seaports and have access to things, but they were kind of sheltered as well. So going all the way back to 509 BC, this small city-state overthrew their king. And this is where the Roman Republic gets started, right? This is, if we go back to the previous slide, this is where our date kind of sets the ball rolling for the Roman Republic. So in 509 BC, this tiny little city-state overthrew their king and created this republic government. Right? They wanted to participate in their government. The people wanted to have a say. A lot of the more powerful families wanted participation in the government. They were not down with the idea of a king. So what did they do instead? They created a pretty stable government. So instead of a king, their elected official was called a consul, and there were two of them. So these two consuls were military and political heads, meaning they had control of the military and they were politically the head of the state, right? They were the kind of main people to make decisions, who kind of organized things. They kind of got the final say. They were very influential, and they were elected by the popular assembly. So this popular assembly served the will of the plebeians, which means a common citizen. So this popular assembly was elected by the common citizens, okay, to represent their will, and then the popular assembly got to choose the consuls. Okay, so basically, kind of by proxy, the people are choosing their heads of government, which is pretty revolutionary for the time, right? So if we're thinking again about, Greece and some of the other developing civilizations, they're making improvements onto the idea of a monarch because the people are getting a say. So the word on this slide that might look most familiar to you is the word Senate. So this Senate is a body of people, 300 people to be exact, who were elected in order to advise the consuls. So this is not necessarily the common people. Most of these people in the Senate were upper class. They were called patricians. So they had money, they had power, they had education, they had influence. And the job of the Senate was not quite like it is now. So if you know anything about United States government, the Senate makes the laws. It's not quite the same in Rome. They could advise the consuls, who were obviously our two political heads, right? They were in charge. They could kind of say, hey, we think you should do this, but they couldn't explicitly make laws. However, they could name a dictator. So this person would be in charge. It's kind of an in case of emergency. So if there was ever a situation where there was maybe like an uprising or there was war, right? If there was kind of this backup plan that they had, they could name this dictator. The other really revolutionary thing about the Roman Republic are called the 12 Tables. And this is where we really see the Roman Republic advancing in terms of more judicial branch, right? So in terms of how we execute the law and how they enforce the law and who the law necessarily applies to. So these 12 tables were written down. And written laws, although that might seem kind of silly to you, was a very revolutionary idea. It's the idea that the laws were written down so that anyone could read them, anyone could understand them because they applied to everyone, right? The king couldn't just say, oh, the law today is going to be this, or I think it's this, or oh no, the law is this, right? He couldn't change the game on the people. So these written laws applied to everybody, rich and poor, and nobody could say anything different. So these lists of laws were mostly what we call civil laws. Again, if you know anything about United States government, this is not necessarily a law concerning maybe like criminals or a law concerning the government. It concerns more the kind of day-to-day relationships between people. So these civil laws pertained a lot more toward marriage and property rights and other things like that that people use when they interact with each other. They're laws nonetheless, right? So if you maybe you're trying to have property or you're trying to inherit some money, these laws would kind of dictate what happened. Another extremely interesting and very influential aspect of the Roman Republic were actually the technology advancements that occurred along with the rise of the Republic. So the Roman alphabet is probably one of your most important day-to-day tools. The English language is written in the Roman alphabet, also called the Latin alphabet, because the Romans did speak Latin, and then that eventually obviously developed into other languages and eventually into English. But it was also developed from the Greeks, so the Romans kind of borrowed it. So a lot of the letters and sounds look sort of the same and sound sort of the same. The Romanization of the Greek alphabet did occur over time, but the Roman alphabet did end up surviving a lot longer and was much more influential due to obviously the Romans taking over so many areas. That Roman alphabet got infused into those areas. As I said, the Romans did speak and write in Latin. Latin, you might know, is a dead language. It's considered to be a dead language, not because it's dead and nobody can read it. Yours truly can actually read it, but you cannot speak in Latin. It's extremely, extremely complex. The Google Translate cannot actually use Latin. It can't translate anything into Latin because it is so complex, and the Romans used it. Another popular and extremely important historical feature of the Romans was their ability to complete arches. So you'll see a lot of their buildings have these arched entryways or arched windows. That is an extremely difficult feat of physics and construction that I am not, unfortunately, uh, educated in that area. So I did include a link in this video that explains in more physics terms how Roman arch engineering is extremely influential. So feel free to click on that if you want a more detailed explanation. But for our purposes, you can just know that arch building is a very important Roman feature, and it occurs in a lot of their architecture. Another thing that Romans were famous for was their engineering techniques, especially concerning farming. So the marshy lands that tended to accumulate in the valleys of the mountains of Italy, they tended to get really marshy. It was hard to kind of drain the excess water out so your crops wouldn't rot. They built drainage ditches, etc., so that the water would drain out of the valleys and their plants could thrive in that very fertile soil. The last thing about the Roman Republic that you might actually know the most about, this development of religion that is based very heavily on Greek mythology, but their Roman counterparts were also equally influential. There are countless mythological stories that are based off of the Roman gods and goddesses that were used to educate children, that were used to explain natural phenomenon, and that were used to teach lessons and to inspire the people. Speaking separately from technology, the Roman Republic also had a ton of advancements in government, a lot of which we still see today, which we will discuss in a couple slides. So first off is the census. So this word actually means a count of the people every 10 years so that the government could keep track of its people, where they lived, how they were distributed, and how so they could distribute their resources more efficiently and effectively. Another development of the Romans was the postal service. They were one of the first to actually deliver mail to their various territories, which increased communication, allowed people to deliver goods, and to speak with others in areas that are farther away. And they also developed a new, more standardized coin system. So rather than bartering goods and services and trading items back and forth, the Romans developed this coin system so that you could exchange an item that was given intrinsic value for different goods and services. So you could exchange your money, your coins, for things rather than just exchanging the things themselves. So I did state that a lot of these government advancements were adopted elsewhere. So if you take a look at the US government, there are so many features that were taken from the Roman government. The one we already talked about was the Senate, which I won't go over in too much depth since we already talked about it. But the US Senate is a legislative body. They make laws. They are heavily influential to the other executive heads of the United States. So the other legislative officials like the House of Representatives, as well as I said, like the executive officials like the president. The other way that the United States government mirrors a lot of Roman ideas is through this idea of checks and balances. So when the Romans developed their consuls and their Senate and the assembly, what they wanted to ensure is that no one part of the government got too much power. So by dividing that power of lawmaking, influence, and elected officials, they ensured that no one person or no one part of the government got too powerful. They also did this by infusing people's rights, right? By writing the laws down and educating people about the laws so that the government couldn't get too powerful because the people were educated. As I also said, the census, so the censors counted the population. They were also in charge of collecting taxes, and so they could then redistribute resources throughout the Roman Republic. The idea of the veto also came from the Roman Republic. So a veto is an act of government where a law is struck down by the head of government. So in the United States case, that would be the president. The president can veto any law that comes to his or her desk from the legislative branch. This also occurred in the Roman Republic. So laws that were passed down could be vetoed and sent back for review. And lastly, as I talked about a little bit before when we were talking about the 12 tables, people's rights were safeguarded by the government, right? So they could read their laws, they could understand their laws, but they also had a few judicial rights. So they were actually innocent until proven guilty, which is also a principle used in the United States. They could appear in front of a judge. They had a right to know what they were being accused of, right? So they couldn't be imprisoned for no reason. And all of these really important ideals, though they might seem silly to you, didn't really occur in history even after the Roman Republic. So they were way ahead of their time. So continuing on to another branch of the Roman Republic is the military. So the military in many ancient civilizations was highly influential because it was your arm of control. So when you had so much land like the Romans did, you had to have a pretty powerful military not only to protect it, but also to enforce your control. So in the military in the Roman Republic, citizen soldiers were highly trained. They were expert. They were brought in young and trained up, and they were indoctrinated into the idea of the Roman army. So once the Roman army had marched into a land and established control, these conquered lands actually had to accept Roman leadership. So not only did they have to bow to the Romans and they had surrendered, but once they had done so, they had to provide men for the army. So not only were they giving up, they were also strengthening this Roman army. The Romans were not unreasonable, however, so some of these conquered lands were given Roman citizenship, either full or partial, so they could have a chance to say, okay, you've conquered us, now we're just going to participate in your government, or they were given partial citizenship, so maybe they couldn't vote, but they were allowed to live as Roman citizens. So this republic did not last forever. As well functioning as it seems, it did come to an end because the Republic did not really have the equipment, did not have the organization to handle this rapidly expanding territory. It was becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and the government, although it was very stable and well set up, wasn't really equipped to handle the amount of land, the amount of people, and the amount of territory that they had to control and enforce their laws in. So in comes Julius Caesar, who is a very influential figure. You've probably heard his name before, either in a Shakespearean play or just from pretty common everyday conversation. So Julius Caesar actually rose to power and forced the Senate to appoint him as the dictator. So as we said earlier, this is a power that the Senate had to name a dictator, but what they ended up doing was to appoint him as dictator, but not for a set amount of time. They appointed him pretty much indefinitely. So Julius Caesar kind of got power that way and didn't really have to give it up. So despite the fact that this pretty much nullified the Republic, right? So the people didn't have any say anymore. Julius Caesar was pretty much entirely in control. He did do a lot of good things, so the people weren't entirely upset. He issued all of these reforms. He employed the jobless. He allocated money and jobs toward the poor. He gave them land to farm, and he gave them purpose. And he also introduced the Julian calendar. The month of July is actually still named for him today. So Julius Caesar pretty much continued in power. He established a lot of reform. He did a lot of good. But others in Rome did not think that he was so good. So others that would wish to kind of gain power as well, or they were ambitious, they rose against him. They stabbed him in a very famous historical event on what is called the Ides of March. This is commonly regarded as the March 15th, so it's about the middle of March. In Latin, they pronounce it the Ides of March, which is in the year 44 BC. So in the middle of March somewhere, in 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated at the statue of Pompey. So that was his rival. So it's a little bit of historical irony for you right there. And he ended up dying at his feet. Octavian and Mark Antony ended up fighting for power. Octavian eventually wins. He becomes Augustus Caesar, and he is now the Roman emperor. He becomes solely in charge of the Empire of Rome. And this is where we see the Roman Republic transitions. It essentially fell at the rise of Julius Caesar, right? It ceased to be a republic, but this is where we really see it rise in the form of an empire. So as I said, Augustus Caesar declared himself the emperor, which means he has all of the power. So the republic is entirely gone. The people cease to have a say. But does that mean that Rome isn't thriving? Not really. So the 500 years that occur after the fall of Julius Caesar are called the Pax Romana. And that is a period of such peace and prosperity in Rome. They grow exponentially. They have all sorts of technological advances. They're monetarily and economically doing really well. So the two emperors that occurred after Augustus Caesar, or Emperor Hadrian, he codified the Roman law. So all citizens became equal before the law. That's supposed to say law. And Emperor Marcus Aurelius read philosophy. He was highly educated. He brought a lot of the art, so much of the famous Roman art, sculpture, a lot of the mythological aspects of Rome became very popular under Marcus Aurelius, and he was the last emperor of what is called the Pax Romana. So the emperors, when they did take control, they didn't entirely dissolve everything. They did keep the Senate. So the Senate still advised, as they once advised the consuls, they kept advising the Roman emperors. So that aspect of Rome did stay the same as the empire grew on. Also, as the empire grew, they began to spread these Roman customs. So while we were talking about Latin earlier, these Romance languages, right? It doesn't mean they're romantic. It's not talking with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. It's not that kind of romantic. It's romance, right? It's influenced by Rome. So all of the languages in Europe, not all of them, but many of them, such as Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, they're all heavily inspired by Latin. Even English, probably 40 to 50% of the English language is inspired by Latin, and this is because of the power of the Roman Empire. You can see how far they spread into Europe. And as this Roman Empire spread, they carried their customs, they carried their mythology, their art. We'll get into the Renaissance eventually, and you can see where all of this Roman influence came in terms of art and music and education, and that spread into Europe as well. So even though the Roman Empire did not last forever, many of their legacies continued to live on.